Okay, thank you for attending, and congratulations to the new councillors on their elections. My name is Jim Creamer. I am actually the Vice Chair, and I will be standing in for Michelle, who has sent her apologies today. And before starting the agenda properly, I'll read out the members of the committee, and if you can identify yourselves for our guests, and if then our guests could identify themselves and the top table. But I'll start with the top table first.
Ben Hope, Democratic Services Officer.
Yeah.
Good evening, David Archer, Head of HR.
And I say I've introduced myself as Jim Creamer, the Vice Chair. So Councillor Paul Hughes, Councillor Catherine Pope, and Councillor Rachel Ellis, who's actually standing in for Councillor Michelle Welsh. Councillor Alex Scroggy is actually missing at the moment. Councillor Jane Walker, and Councillor Russell Whiting. And if our guests could introduce themselves as well, or colleagues rather than guests.
Craig Thompson, Organiser, GMB Union.
And I'm Alison Hunt, the Treasurer of Unison.
Thank you. Now start the meeting proper. We'll go through the agenda as written in your diaries or your screens, actually. And the first item, apologies for absence and substitution, and I've mentioned one, let's mention it again, is Councillor Rachel Ellis is actually substituting for Councillor Michelle Welsh, and hopefully Councillor Scroggy will be here shortly. Item 2, to approve the correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of February. On this one, unfortunately, the only person that was actually here on the 21st of February is Councillor Scroggy. So in actual fact, if it's okay, if the committee will agree, if the officers can agree that it's a true record, we'll accept that, or if you're willing to accept it, it's the committee's responsibility to accept. So are you willing to accept the officers that it's a true record? Yeah. Thank you. Any declarations of interests? None? None? Right, I'm going to move on to item 4, minor staffing changes.
Thank you, Chair. So it's the first of 3 information items this evening. It's a standing item which you'll begin to recognise as the committees go forward in time. Normally what would happen in a restructuring exercise, perhaps where there might be proposals that could result in redundancy, then consultation would normally take place over a longer length of time. I mean, normally we use locally about 30 days and would often come to you in this committee for comment and recommendation to the Chief Executive, who would normally be authorised to take decision about the final structural change. So for those bigger decisions, it would be a fuller process. So that said, some changes that we make in terms of structure, we do outside that full process. And what we do afterwards is to report those for your information. So there are, I think, 4 to report this evening. Excuse me. The first one is in the old planning team, I suppose, the Development Management Service. And the changes were within the team to create a new senior post, development manager post, but also to look at the post below that and to look at enriching that work and recognising that jobs do change over time and a requirement by the organisation. So what's happened within the team is that although posts have been removed from establishment, other posts have been created, and actually that has removed the risk of redundancy, and the post holders within the team have been successfully placed in those new posts, those high graded posts. All of those changes have been made now, just looking through that list, and the development manager post is being advertised. So it has been, I suppose, a restructure that has been successful, and we weren't faced with any redundancies as a result of that. A second change was in the Parks and Street Cleansing Service, the commercial tree team. So the commercial tree team, it did what it says on the tin, really, I suppose, which was to look out for business within the borough to remove trees from private land. The service has been withdrawn. In terms of team members, there were originally 3 people within the team. We've been carrying vacancies for a length of time. It was hard to fill within that team. There was one officer affected by the proposal to close the team, and he has been successfully redeployed within the PASC area. Similar sort of work in the same graded post. So again, not an issue in terms of any redundancy. And just over the page onto page 10, a minor change within legal services to increase the number of hours in a part-time post. That's been in place for quite some time on a temporary basis, and it was a regularisation of that arrangement. And again, in the information and communication technology team, similar to the planning team, we've looked again at sort of demands of jobs and looked at enrichment of those jobs. And what we've done is to create some new posts at a higher grade, and we've filled those successfully from the officers within the team. If there are any questions, happy to take them.
Any questions or comments? No? So we accept the report. Those in favour, please show, just to... Any against, and no abstentions. Thank you. Item 5, joint...
Thank you, Chair. So apologies, it's me again. It'll be me again for the next report. So again, a standing report for this committee. It's a report that looks at sickness absence across the council. The way that information is presented, again, is fairly standard. So in terms of the diagrams and charts, maybe I'll just perhaps start there. So on page 13, what you'll see is a bar chart with a dotted line. So just to explain that briefly this time, I won't do this every time, but it just as a starting point, it gives you some background. So the bar chart shows the full-time equivalent days lost per full-time equivalent employee of the council. So that's a standard measure that's been used for many, many years in local government. The information is shown in the bars for the month in terms of rate of absence. The dotted line is a trend, a 12-month trend, if you like. And by the fact that it's going down, that's an encouraging sign. That's a good sign, and it hasn't always been the case. So hopefully a simple way of just demonstrating what is in the table below. If you move to pages 14 and 15, but starting with 14, quite busy tables, but what they show is trends of absence over the current month and last 6 months as well. So the first table on page 14 is the year-to-date information. So if you look down at the full-time equivalent days lost, right at the bottom, the grand total talks about 8.28 days 8.28 days lost. That's the figure that you'll see reported in terms of our comparative data, and it's year-end to March. So the outturn for this current year at 8.28 days is good. It's a good result. The target was 9 days, so we're doing much better than target. Again, that's not always been the case, and I'll perhaps cover some of that in the narrative in a moment. But that table is the year-to-date information. And again, as you travel to the right-hand side of the table, it gives you that information at different points in time, 1 month ago, 2 months ago, up to 6 months ago. Does that as a total, and does it by the team as well. If you look at the detail on page 15, a similar sort of table, but the information there is just for current month, so it's 1 month at a time. Quite helpful to see how absence is improving or worsening within teams. So it's a snapshot piece of information. Just covering briefly onto 16 actually. So page 16, there's a table that looks at long and short-term absence. So long-term as a definition normally is 20 days lost in a month. We're running at 5 cases. We were in March. That is sort of low to I suppose medium numbers. We've been running at sort of 8, 9, 10 occasions in some months. earlier in the year. So not many cases of long-term absence, but if you look at the table, the bottom line there, it accounts for over 40% of the days lost. So it is material. So for each one occasion of long-term absence, it does significantly contribute towards total levels of absence. So they're the tables that you'll see going forwards on a regular basis and the information that's contained in those. I suppose just as a summary, a bit of a narrative around those, as I say, the outturn for the year to March was 8.28 days against a target of 9 days, so a good result. We've not always been there. At the start of the year, absence was running at over 11.5 days, so there's been a substantial improvement over time. Probably the data in recent times may well have been skewed by COVID and absences relating to COVID. Even though we perhaps don't report in the same sort of ways nationally, we understand that the COVID actually is more endemic now and people still are away from work because of it. But in terms of our data, absence rates for COVID now run at around 6%. In the same month last year, they were running at more than twice that. So, things have changed a little bit. In terms of how we look to support people who are absent from work, we have active management of absence, particularly where absences are longer term. So we look to provide support for people to make a return at the earliest opportunity. That doesn't mean an unsafe return. It means at the earliest opportunity, sometimes with measures in place to help that supported return. So it could be working at reduced hours or perhaps changing a job and working in different ways. So, we undertake training with managers to help them to manage those cases. That's done regularly. Again, in terms of perhaps how we also try to improve the way we manage cases of absence, there are case management meetings between senior managers and HR reps as well. So that also helps to ensure that we act consistently between teams. So that's important. I'm tempted, Chair, maybe just to take questions now for that information before I'm just moved on to the what we're seeing in Appendix 2.
Yeah, if that's okay. And before we do move on, I'm particularly impressed with injuries at work, 0. Any questions? Catherine.
So obviously it's really good to have to have come in under your target. So I'm just interested because my background's NHS, so 6% seems quite a generous target to me, and I realise that COVID has skewed all targets. So I wondered, was the target always around that level? Has it been increased because of COVID? And are there any plans to lower the target since you're achieving it?
I've got an old man's memory, so I can't remember 2 questions at once. So I'll just go with the one, please. There are a number of questions there, weren't there? So for the current year, the target remains at 9 days. It has varied over time. It's been, I'm trying to remember back, I think it's certainly been at 10 days in the past. It may have been slightly higher. Longer ago, we'd set an ambitious target of 6 days, and that proved to be unachievable, and because of that was almost kind of meaningless, I suppose. So the target has moved over time, up and down. So in terms of challenge, it's something that senior leadership team would look at the start of each year, along with any of the other performance indicators. Last year, we missed target by quite substantially. And so for that reason, it felt right to keep it at the 9 days rather than to move it around any lower than that. I suppose 8.28 days, it is lower, so it's a fair question about stretch. So for this year, we'd remain at 9. I mean, my thought is perhaps see how we're going this year and to see whether the trend continues to lower or stabilise. And even if it stabilises, perhaps it would be appropriate to suggest to SLT that the target was perhaps more of a stretch target. I would say that, again, I'll cover it perhaps in some of the narrative for the Appendix 2, but already there are things in place to help encourage and support people back to work. I guess the challenge would be, can we do more to try to bring that down? And I'm not sure what the answer is with that. Does that help? Okay.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. Casting my mind back quite a few years, when these figures were presented to Performance Scrutiny Committee, there used to be a comparison with other similar authorities. Do we still collect that data and make a comparison?
So within the NOTS HR group, we do look at comparator data. So we're actually in the middle of compiling that. What I would say, I won't name authorities, but I do have information back for 4 authorities at the moment, and we're due to meet this week as a group, so hopefully it'll be a full suite by the end of the week. What I would say is that in every other authority for the last year that I've seen up to now, the rate of absence has been above target for that organisation, and some are lower and some are higher than targets for us, but all of them have been above target rather than below. So we are sort of bucking the trend in that way.
Will the comparative data be presented to a future meeting of this committee?
I can provide that perhaps to you as members, if that was helpful.
Yeah.
So hopefully by the end of this week, that should be available. I may need to do it on an anonymised basis. I can give you an idea about whether it's a district or not, but I can do that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Rachel, Councillor Harris.
Thank you. It's better. I'm just looking at the reasons for absence. There we go. And a couple of questions, really. I can see that you're providing an online bespoke mental health awareness package, which is great. What kind of uptake have you had with regard to that? How effective do you feel it's been? Because absence due to stress and depression is clearly quite a high category. The other thing I'm sort of quite interested in is, I mean, you can't do a great deal about post-operative recovery, but when it comes to musculoskeletal pain, how is the fast track for physiotherapy working? And I'm presuming that most of these individuals are in occupations who are physically active rather than office bound, but am I wrong?
No, you're right. So I was going to cover that in some of the narrative, but so if I perhaps just give a fuller answer, if I may. So maybe covering the last point first, it is correct. For occupations which are perhaps more physical in nature, the absence rate due to the musculoskeletal problems is higher there. It is, and I think probably for most of our referrals, because to access that service, the referral would normally be through HR. It is mostly those jobs. We did wonder whether people working from home may have had an impact there in terms of perhaps having a home office environment that was less than ideal, could have made a difference. It doesn't seem to have done. It is those other jobs. In terms of the offering of the mental health support training, I think take-up, I can't give you an exact figure, I'm sorry, but take-up was probably fairly disappointing. Not a huge amount of people tended to take that up. Again, you can lead a horse to water, I suppose. And again, for some training, health and safety, I would say it should be mandatory. For something like this, I think it would be a mistake to make it mandatory. It is an offer. So it is a case of reminding people and try to encourage, and we have done that. But take-up was relatively low. What I would say is in terms of other support that the organisation offers, we have access to the Employee Assistance Programme. So Employee Assistance Programme means different things, I suppose. It's a 24/7 service that would allow people to have access to talking therapies Often that's over a telephone, but it can be sort of face-to-face for up to 6 sessions as well. So again, we don't get to know too much about uptake there. My understanding is that particularly sort of during lockdown and towards the end of lockdown, the service was better used. And again, we have done an employee survey that would suggest that people's mental health, they would say, did suffer during lockdown and spending more time at home. So that probably makes sense in terms of that service usage being perhaps better used, I guess. Employee Assistance Programme also provides signposting and guidance for people who might have relationship issues, might have financial problems. So it is a service that is designed to be accessible for all. And we do remind people about the existence of that, not just through items on the intranet, because not everyone has access to that, but it is posters at the depot and leisure centres as well. So we do try to publicise that access as widely as we can. So I would say that, in terms of providing support for people, particularly in these areas where perhaps absence rates are higher, there are things in place. We also put on a training course at the start of the year for employees who felt that they might need some support with their own mental health issues, but also to managers, to help managers to again, be supportive of members in their team. And what does that look like, and what practical measures can you take to help that person? Because it makes sense for everyone, because it improves their ability to work, as well as providing the support which we're duty bound to provide as well. So we're doing lots of things in lots of ways. Again, you can, I suppose, lead the horse to water and do what you can and keep putting energy into those ideas to make it part of everyday working life. So be assured that things are happening, not always taken up by everyone, but things are happening.
Sorry.
Thanks, Chair. I've got three brief questions. Sorry. You mentioned home working in response to Councillor Ellis's question. What support is the council, or has the council given to people when they start to work from home in terms of working spaces and having the right equipment, etc.? I see from the table on in Appendix 2 on page 17 that although the number of COVID days lost has halved, it's still nearly 200 days. What's the council's current advice for working or not working when you have COVID? Is it still stay off for the whole week or whatever it is, or work from home if you're feeling well? And then I guess a kind of foundational question for me about the target is, why do we have a target for the number of days lost? Because if people are ill, then they're ill. And I don't think many council workers will be thinking, I'll go in today to meet my target if they're really not feeling well. So just as an introduction about that. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. So I'll take them as they come. So support for home working. So I'm trying to think of an exception, and I can't. So I think all the jobs that we have where home working is involved, it will be using laptop and computer equipment. So for each of those jobs where somebody's working from home, there should be a display screen equipment, test DSE assessment, completed by the manager, and that sort of it's bespoke for each individual. So there'll be one of those assessments for each of the people working from home. So that would have been done at the time of lockdown, and it should be something that happens for anyone now coming into the workplace that would have a proportion of their working time at home. So I suppose that support would come from an occasion where someone identified a particular problem, be it the individual or the manager. So it might be a need for perhaps a raised workstation or a chair of a particular type. Then if that's a reasonable adjustment, then that's something that the council would normally provide. So yes, there's an assessment. Yes, there is a reaction to the assessment. COVID, our guidelines are the same as the national guidelines, so I think that we don't treat COVID any differently to any other sickness absence. So obviously during the initial stages of COVID and lockdown, the guidance changed nationally within local government. So for a length of time, COVID absence was perhaps treated separately and outside sort of trigger points. That's no longer the case. It is endemic. It is like a cold. And generally the advice is, well, if you can perhaps work from home, normally you would do. Otherwise, if you're fit and well to work, then you would come into work. So it's not treated differently. And target, why targets? Good question. I mean, targets have been in place, I suppose, for a long time. A long time for me would be, I'm thinking back to the old best value indicator, so the best part of 20 years. So it is a way of assessing trend within the organisation. So for me, I would say that as a business, it's a useful thing to have. Is sickness, something that's on the increase? If so, why? Is there a concern about the way we manage sickness or don't manage sickness? If it's improving, actually, well, what are we doing right? And can we do more things right to try to drive that down to improve efficiency? It can be useful to understand as an organisation, back to Councillor Hughes' question, in comparison with others. The old best value indicator was useful because it defined quite clearly how to calculate the measure we still use. What I would say over time that in some organisations, some of the organisations have worked to try to improve the figure, perhaps by doing things like excluding longer term absence. So the national indicator no longer exists in its pure form. Some organisations, because of that, have changed the way they use that, they interpret that data. So you need to have care when you compare with others. You need to have care when you compare with others also because we're not the same anymore. Some organisations provide leisure services or a direct service or a housing service, and then others don't. So you need to look at data intelligently. It's not just a number anymore. But I suppose it's useful to understand those sort of trends and those sort of comparisons. Behind the scenes also, what we have is quite a well-developed system of, I suppose, absence monitoring at an individual level. So we have something that most organisations have, trigger points. So it's numbers of absence over lengths of time. And we use that information to, I guess, manage attendance and manage absence. So the organisation has set the minimum levels of attendance that it requires, and people that would fall outside that then would be placed into more formal monitoring. If they continue to fall outside that, then it could lead to a dismissal from the council. So, I mean, there are different sorts of monitoring is what I'm trying to say. So probably that's all I'd say. If you think there's more, please let me know.
Sorry, could I just come back? I completely accept everything you say about the kind of trends and reporting, but that would be possible without having the target, I guess would be my point. Because I think as a member of staff, if my employer was saying to me, you haven't met your target, then it's a kind of arbitrary target, it seems to me, because of the nature of sickness and absence.
So back to the idea. Sorry. So back to the idea of the individual target. So the attendance management policy doesn't refer to the 9 days particularly. So the 9 days is an organisational target to perhaps look at those macro comparisons that we spoke about. Within the detail of the policy, it talks about initially 4 occasions or 10 days of absence. If someone isn't able to attend within those boundaries, at that point they're placed into formal monitoring. Then over the next 2 years, if again they aren't able to attend to meet target, and the target again is 4 occasions and 10 days over a 2-year period. If they fall outside that, then they move to a final stage of the process, which is 2 occasions of absence or 5 days within a 6-month period. If they're not able to meet the standards of attendance there, then there's a hearing, a chance to sort of discuss the reasons why, but the result at that point could be dismissal. So we use numbers in different ways, I suppose, at a macro level and an individual level.
Councillor Walker?
I'm just having a look at the reasons for absence, and I've noticed that one of the reasons that's not down, which is actually quite close to my heart, is members of staff who are going through the menopause. I hope it's not under other or depression, because I think it's something a little bit different to that. And I'm just wondering whether that is something that you've got a lead for, or you've got someone who's someone to go to for members of staff who are suffering. I'm a bit of a lead at my workplace, and you know, I try and offer staff lots of support because I know what it's like. So I just wonder what the borough are doing to support members of staff that are going through that, because I do think that is important, and I was a bit disappointed. It's not an illness, but these aren't all really illnesses in a sense. You're just listing reasons, aren't you? And I just think that should be under it, really, on a separate one, or whether you've got that covered or not. Thank you.
So, excuse me, probably two things there for me. So the reasons for absence are the reasons that employees sort of would declare as well. So we are able to add to that list if someone told us my reason for absence is to do with menopause. So we could add to that list. What I would say is the council has a menopause policy, a support policy. That's a formal policy that is in the employee handbook, and that was adopted initially through, I suppose, work that Unison had wanted to promote. So it was a good example for me of perhaps a trade union, I guess, working in partnership with us, and actually probably more than that, to encourage that sort of development of policy. And we were one of the first, I think perhaps the first in the county certainly, and one of the first in the region to have that policy. So I'm happy to forward that to members of the committee as well if it's helpful information, because that's in the employee handbook. So I think it probably answers really quite fully what you might say about, well, what is the council doing at a practical level? And it's there in the policy. It's not pages and pages, it's a few pages, and it's really quite concise and practical in its nature about the support that is in place. So I'm happy to send that. Does that, Anne? Please, yes. So go on.
I think I'll have a read of that, yeah, because it's hard, because like sometimes someone's been awake all night and they're really tired, but then they come into work, but they're not ill, but they are in a sense, if you know what I mean. It's a fine line, and I just want to know that the borough is supporting their members of staff.
Yeah.
And do you have a person here then that you can go to if you wanted to be signposted?
So the policy really talks about sort of, I suppose, managers and their duty and their duty of care to manage their team properly for all sorts of, I suppose, personal issues, requirements, differences within the team. And that's one of them. So actually, you know, again, the policy is quite clear about the manager's responsibility. I think the mention of HR there is a referral as well. So, as I say, the emphasis of the policy is really on practical things, because words don't really mean too much. It's what we do. So really happy to send it out to members of the committee. And again, if there are any questions arising from that, just happy to deal with those. Yeah, okay. Yep.
So, I've just got one question before we move on, and that is the management has kept up to date with changes and promotions, etc., that each manager has kept up to date with the process that they're supposed to be applying.
I'd say yes. So in terms of sort of, I suppose, promotion of what is available, I think I've covered that. But so we do recognise that an awful lot of jobs don't have access to PCs or laptops. So we do promotional material in appropriate ways around the place. In terms of training, then training in terms of sickness management is something that we offer on a regular basis, sort of cyclically delivered through my team as well. So yes, I would say is the answer to the question. I would say that some managers are better than others, but that's true in any organisation. But we do have the training there to support those managers to help improve where perhaps there are some gaps.
Thank you for that. So it's an absolutely active policy, which is what we want to hear, to be honest, as well. So you're ready for the next one? What is it? The staffing issues?
Thank you, Chair. So just the last one this evening. Again, this is a standing item report and is designed just to try to, I guess, just bring to your attention issues that might be of current interest. National pay remains, I think, an issue of current interest. Pay awards are supposed to be applying from the 1st of April each year. I can't easily remember a time when it actually happened on the 1st of April. It's not been the case for quite some time, I don't think. We are often delayed into the year and then we're paying back and all these other things. This year is no different, so you'll understand that from the narrative there that there are three bodies really, I suppose. One is sort of NJC for local government workers. That's most of our staff. That's most people that work for us are covered by those conditions. A small group are covered by J&C conditions for chief officers, so that's directors and heads of service. And there is the chief exec who is covered by a separate J&C for chief executives. This is the national pay and conditions bodies. The only body that has currently agreed a national award is the J&C for chief officers, so heads of service and directors. That was a 3.5% award. For NJC employees, most people, locally we recognise Unison and GMB. Nationally, Unite are also a union that contribute to the pay negotiations. All three unions are probably in slightly different places in terms of where they are, in terms of balloting arrangements, I think it's fair to say. The employers' offer, a final offer made by employers, is for a £1,925 pay award, which is the same as last year. Sounds an odd number. It equates to about £1 an hour difference. That's where the number comes from. All unions nationally have, I think, rejected that offer now and are looking to go out to find out if there is support for industrial action. They're all in different places. And that if there is support, probably that will come for support for industrial action, then action would be coming later in the year, probably around September time. Some of the unions are looking to do that on a disaggregated basis, which means that it will be site by site. Other unions would look at it, the issue of being sort of more of a national question about whether, you know, they would wish to see the workforce go out on strike nationally. So probably not much, excuse me, not much more to report at the moment in terms of detail, other than to say there is still no agreement other than for the chief officers, and that I think towards, where are we now? Probably towards the end of summer, we would be in a better position to understand, is it likely that there is industrial action? If so, is that a national issue? Is it a local issue? And if it is a local issue, will it affect us? Because not all sites may be affected in the same way. So it's a watching brief, really, but just to tell you that currently there isn't agreement, and yes, again, we are in dispute between employer side and employee side nationally.
Any questions? Yes?
Yes, so obviously recognise that it's a national pay award, that's not in your gift anyway, and also recognise that people have a right to fair reward for their work and times are tough. If the ballots come back and there is going to be industrial action, are there already agreements about if any work is core areas that have to be carried on regardless, or how is it decided what services will be continued or stopped? Because obviously we will have people in our wards who'd have concerns about the impact on them.
So the idea is sort of life and limb services, really. That is a matter for agreement at the start of each proposed industrial action. So what I would say is that I think that perhaps I'm going to speak for the unions now, but I mean you probably have your own view about this. You might want to contribute. There are probably very few services that we provide that are really life and limb. The way it would work is that as an employer we would propose jobs that we would see as being key and critical to the safety of people, and that would be something that the union would confirm their acceptance of or otherwise. So that would be the normal process. I don't know whether the trade unions have any views at all, but
That's spot on.
does that help?
And I suppose the follow-up to that is, does a national pay agreement come with national funding of the pay agreement?
No, it doesn't. Well, no, it's a good question, because actually that's something that the LGA had tried to ask nationally for the award last year, because the award last year was perhaps at a higher level than had been anticipated by many organisations. And my understanding is that the question was asked, but either no reply has been given or the answer is no. I'm not quite sure which it is. I think that I wouldn't hold out much hope for that.
It's a quick comment. The national government leaving us at the sharp end, see what we can do best. And I say it will, as already been said, it will be down to some minor negotiations with the unions about what we consider and what they consider, but in the final turn, if they've got a ballot for strike action or strike action or action short of, they will decide what they think is best for their members to achieve their goals, which is fair enough. Any further questions or comments on?
Sorry, and just to finish briefly on page 20, just the last item that is just, again, for information, really. Just an update on the equality, diversity and inclusion work that we're doing in terms of training. We have commissioned a bespoke training package, which has been rolled out, and I talked before about mandatory training. This is a mandatory training course. Pleased to say that we're heading towards 90% of staff now that have been trained in that. The work we have to do this year now is to find ways of delivering that same training to people who don't have easy access to a laptop or PC. So that is in my work programme for this year. And I suppose just a final reminder or piece of information that the training is available for members as well. So please feel free to access that.
Yeah, Russell, and before I ask, will we be getting the link for that?
I can send that.
Russell.
I was just going to make the point that it should probably be mandatory for elected members as well, if it's mandatory for members of staff.
I would totally agree with that, and ask you to take it back to your political groups, because that is a decision for your whips stroke managers groups. But I would totally agree with it as an option, but it will be up to the groups. Any further questions or comments? In that case, thank you for attending this new session for the next 4 years. And I'm sure it'll get far more interesting as we move along. Yes, especially when it hits September. So thank you very much. A safe journey home.